memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Ozturk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Ozturk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, but that's exactly, in fact, what happened. The State Department wrote a memo concluding.
During a congressional hearing, Washington Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal sharply questioned Secretary of State Marco Rubio over the revocation of a student visa that has now become a national flashpoint. Before we get deeper into what happened and why it matters, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any of our in-depth coverage breaking down power, policy, and accountability in Washington.
Representative Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being here. On March 21st, 2025, the State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Rümeysa Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed. According to an internal State Department memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Ozturk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Ozturk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, but that's exactly, in fact, what happened. The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Ozturk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she'd engaged in any activities were a threat to national security. And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Ozturk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
But is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you,
Mr.
in the meanwhile, I have the authority, I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country.
You said that, Mr. Secretary. Let me reclaim my time, because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says. And that means that you are trumping the legal supreme court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country apart.
I'm talking about this particular case where you revoked the student visa of a Turkish citizen who was a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that you didn't like. And suddenly you allowed for masked men to whisk her off the street. And you have multiple jobs, apparently. You're the national security advisor as well. So don't tell me it's not your job who snatches her off the street.
We don't do the snatching, but I can tell you we do the visa revocations.
Let me ask you about the national security consequences of people, masked men on the streets, snatching people off the streets. If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrests, why are they hiding their identities?
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked? Is that
that law student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her student visa based on an op-ed which trumps the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Someone's coming up here to stir up problems on our campus. We're going to revoke their visa.
She didn't do any of that. She wrote an op-ed.
Well,
She
that's
wrote
what
an
you
op-ed,
claim.
and I'm talking to
Claim.
you about her
That's her
particular
lawyer's
case.
claims and your
You
claims. Those are not the facts.
You reclaiming my time. You revoked her student visa
Yes,
because
proudly.
she wrote an op-ed.
And
Would
we'll do
you
more. We're
revoke?
gonna do more of
I
them.
have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest
Are
who's
you
here to stir up
going to
trouble.
revoke the visa of somebody who made
Send me
that?
the case, I'll look at it.
that
I'm looking
statement?
to get crazy people out of our
Actually, it's not
country.
just about revoking.
Forward
You
to
actually,
revoking the
Secretary
visas of any
Rubio,
lunatics you
excuse
can
me,
identify.
reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Kleinhaus, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said? There's the case.
That's not a visa.
You granted that person
That's
to
a
enter the
totally
United
different process.
States.
That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio,
student visas are a privilege.
Secretary
we deny
Rubio,
them all the time, and we'll revoke them.
You revoked
And
a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for
Gentlelady's time
masked
has
men
expired.
to
that's your
snatch
claim. That's
somebody off
accurate. That's
the
your claim.
street.
Your time's
That's your claim.
expired.
That's your claim. That's not accurate.
Recognize ranking.
The case centers on Rümeysa Öztürk, a Turkish graduate student studying in the United States. According to court filings and internal State Department documents, her student visa was revoked after she co-authored an opinion piece published in her university newspaper. That op-ed criticized U.S. policy related to Gaza and Israel, an act protected under the First Amendment for citizens, but one that the State Department argued could be grounds for visa revocation under its discretionary authority. Soon after her visa was revoked, Öztürk was detained by armed and masked federal agents, taken off the street, and transported to a detention facility in Louisiana. She was reportedly denied access to legal counsel for nearly a whole day. A federal judge later ordered her release, stating there was no evidence she posed a threat to national security and noting that the only apparent basis for her detention was her published opinion. That is where the confrontation began. Jayapal pressed Rubio directly, asking whether writing an op-ed constitutes a legitimate foreign policy threat. Rubio responded by saying that visas are a privilege, not a constitutional right, and argued that the State Department has broad authority to deny or revoke them if an individual is deemed a threat. But Jayapal pushed further, arguing that the Constitution does not allow the Secretary of State to override free speech protections simply because the speaker is a non-citizen. She questioned where, exactly, the Constitution gives one official the power to decide which speech is acceptable and which speech leads to arrest and detention. This exchange is not just about one student. It exposes a deeper legal and constitutional tension that often stays out of public view. Under U.S. law, the executive branch does have wide discretion over visas. Courts have historically given the government latitude when it comes to immigration decisions, but the First Amendment complicates that authority, especially when government action appears to punish speech rather than conduct. Legal experts warn that using visa revocations to target political expression could have a chilling effect on academic freedom, especially on college campuses, where international students are often at the center of debate, research, and protest. Universities rely heavily on foreign students, not just academically, but economically. If speech becomes grounds for removal, critics argue it sends a message that dissent comes with consequences. Jayapal also questioned the manner of Öztürk's arrest. She asked why masked, unidentified agents were used, suggesting that such tactics are typically reserved for dangerous suspects, not graduate students. Rubio distanced himself from the arrest itself, saying his responsibility ended with the visa revocation and that enforcement decisions were made by other agencies. That answer did not satisfy Jayapal, who argued that the optics matter, especially at a time when public trust in institutions is already fragile. Masked arrests, secretive detentions, and delayed access to counsel raise red flags, even if the individual involved is not a U.S. citizen. The exchange escalated further when Jayapal pointed to what she described as inconsistent enforcement. She cited cases in which individuals who made openly hateful or extremist statements were granted refugee or immigration status under different programs. How much authority should the executive branch have over immigration, and where does the Constitution draw a line when speech is involved? It is a question that courts may ultimately have to answer, especially as similar cases continue to emerge. As this story develops, it could set a precedent that affects thousands of international students, scholars, and visa holders across the country. It also raises a question every viewer should consider. If speech can be used as evidence of a threat for some, what stops that definition from expanding? If you want continued coverage that goes beyond the sound bites and explains what these moments mean for your rights, your universities, and the future of free expression, subscribe to the channel. We will keep following this story and bring you the context others leave out.